Welcome to Covenant Communications Audio Library. We are pleased to present Walk with an Angel, written by Dan Yates, narrated by Laurie Payne. We hope you enjoy the presentation.
Chapter 1. Tanner Nilsson glanced nervously at his watch. "This will never do," he yelled at the cabbie. "I have a plane to catch and precious little time to spare." "Blimey," the cabbie retorted, shaking his head. "Why the devil must you Americans always be in such a hurry? It's not like I wanted the bloomin' engine to stall." For the third time, the cabbie twisted the key, allowing the starter to grind with no more success than the previous two tries. Tanner exhaled disgustedly. "Can you at least call me another cab? I need to get to the airport." "Sorry, mate, radio's on the blink. There's a call box just up the block, so you can call one from there. And let's not be forgetting the £6 you owe me for motoring you this far." Tanner grabbed his luggage and climbed out of the cab. Removing a $10 bill from his wallet, he handed it to the man. "All I have is American money, but this should more than cover the 10 blocks you brought me." Tanner backed up a step as the cabbie muttered an obscenity under his breath while grinding the engine again. "Blinking lot you've got to worry about, catching a flight when another will be slipping out just behind. This motor car represents me means of feeding the kids and the missus." The starter ground to a halt, and the cabbie slammed a fist against the wheel. "It's flippin' soup we'll be eating tonight, if you can believe." Tanner rolled his eyes and pulled out another 5, which he shoved into the cabbie's shirt pocket. Not waiting for a response, he headed off into the fog. At the first intersection, he checked his watch and weighed his options. No way could he catch his flight now. Oh well, he'd just have to make do. There were other flights, just as the cabbie had observed. Noticing a bus stop at the corner, Tanner abandoned the idea of another taxi and took a seat on the bench. There was something about a foggy London morning that always fascinated Tanner. Fog was a rarity for a native of the Arizona desert. The heaviness of the air felt almost eerie. Even the faintest sounds carried through it. The whistle of a bobby directing traffic 2 or 3 blocks away reached Tanner's ears with striking clarity. Somewhere off in the distance a dog barked, and footsteps from a pair of leather-soled shoes sounded, hidden deep in the cloudy folds. A feeling of melancholy enveloped Tanner, and for some reason his thoughts turned to Brandon Cheney. The thought of his old friend eventually brought a smile, but he still wondered how a foggy London morning could possibly initiate thoughts of an old desert rat like Brandon Cheney. As always, memories of Brandon came with bittersweet sentiment. During their college years, Tanner and Brandon were 2 of a group some dubbed the 5 Musketeers, a fitting title considering the closeness of this fivesome. It was a running joke that they were too close to even cast individual shadows. The others in the group were Vincent Wagner, Corey Harper, and Troy Adams. It wasn't surprising that all 5 should fall in love with the same woman, and what a woman Catherine Dalton was. Beautiful, beautiful Catherine. But in the end, it worked out so not one of them ever won Catherine's heart. Tanner was never completely sure, but he always felt he was the front-runner in Catherine's book. He might have fared even better with her if it weren't for his incessant anxiety of commitment. But the what-if surrounding Catherine was one page of history that could never be verified this late in the game. One thing he knew for sure, he was still in love with her, just as was Vincent. The rest of them? Well, that was another story, much of which centered around poor Brandon's untimely fate. As for Catherine, she had moved halfway around the world to Melbourne, Australia, and had never been heard from since. Tanner allowed his thoughts to wander back to the big party held the night after he and the others had graduated with honors from the University of Northern Arizona at Flagstaff. The party was Vincent's idea, of course. Vincent was the only one who could afford such a bash, and he had access to his father's mountain cabin, located only half an hour away from the university. Zachary Wagner was both owner and CEO of Wagner Aerospace Incorporated. Zachary used the cabin on occasion to entertain celebrities, mostly politicians whom he wanted to charm for business reasons. At Vincent's request, his father made the cabin available for the party. The entire graduating class was invited, about 150 people. All 5 Musketeers had offered to escort Catherine that night, but it was Tanner who drew the honor. He was never sure if it was him or his car that had won her over, since she needed a ride home to Mesa later in the evening, but it didn't matter. What did matter was that she was his date for the night, a night filled with events that flowed back so vividly now. "Looks like we're the last ones to arrive," Catherine said as they entered the room where the party was already in full swing. "It's my fault. Sorry I made you wait while I went back to my apartment to tell everyone goodbye. They're such great friends." Tanner shrugged. "Hey, no big deal, Katie. Even with Corey's appetite, there's enough food left to stock a mom-and-pop market." Truthfully, it wasn't food Tanner was concerned about. It was keeping Catherine to himself with those 4 hungry-eyed cowboys just waiting to cut him off at the pass. He had something very special in mind for the night, and had even bought a ring for the occasion. It was a scary thought, but something he had managed to talk himself into. He wanted to wait for just the right moment, and since he would be driving her home, the 2 of them would be alone. He hoped he'd be able to find that right moment in there someplace. The 2 of them weren't 3 steps into the room when Vincent grabbed the microphone for an announcement. "Hey, people, listen up. I want everyone to know that my good buddy Tanner has just chauffeured the love of my life to the party. Let it be known that Katie and I have set the date. We marry tomorrow, and everyone here is invited to the reception." Tanner rolled his eyes as the room exploded in laughter. "In your dreams," he yelled back. "Katie and I just eloped. That's why we're late." Tanner slipped an arm through Catherine's and led her over to the food table, where Corey was refilling his plate for what Tanner guessed was at least the 3rd time. Corey was one of those guys who could pack away more calories than most could even count. At 5'5", he was nearly as round as he was tall. But with Corey, no one ever seemed to notice, since his winning personality kept everyone around him in stitches. Corey's fondest aspiration in life was to become a great actor like Harrison Ford or Tom Cruise. Tanner never doubted that Corey could reach his goal, with the possible exception he'd become more of a Danny DeVito. Tanner and Catherine nearly had their plates filled when Brandon joined them. To Tanner's pleasant surprise, Brandon was more interested in showing off a graduation present from his grandfather than he was in Catherine. "Take a look at this," Brandon exclaimed, holding out what appeared to be a very old pocket watch. "Granddad promised me this years ago, but I wasn't supposed to get it until I got married." "Your granddad is a smart man," Corey cut in. "By the time you hooked some poor female, he'd be too old and blind to see you get this watch." Brandon ignored Corey. "Look at it," he said again. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" Tanner took the watch and held it where both he and Catherine could examine it. It was pure gold and had an elaborate engraving of a telescope against the backdrop of a star-filled sky on the face. "Your granddad was an astronomer, wasn't he?" Tanner asked, realizing the significance of the engraving. "Yeah," Brandon responded, smiling ear to ear. "He wanted me to follow suit, and he was influential in my choosing to study another branch of science." "Computer science," Tanner laughed. "A far cry from the stars, unless they happen to be part of your screensaver." "It's still science," Brandon argued. "Important science by today's standards." "What's the value of the watch?" Catherine asked. "Don't know and don't care," Brandon said, retrieving the watch and opening it for all to see. "Granddad put this inscription in it just for me," he pointed out. Tanner leaned in to read the inscription. "Reach for the stars, and even on the darkest night, I'll always be there with you." "Wow, that is something," he remarked. Corey spoke up again. "Maybe I should hold the watch for you. We all know how forgetful you computer nerds can be. I wouldn't want you to lose it, man." "You're lucky I even let you look at this," Brandon laughed. "I'd never let the watch into hands that might get mustard all over it." Just then, Tanner noticed Vincent walking toward them. To his surprise, Brandon gently shoved him and Catherine toward the dance floor. "Go have some fun, you 2, he said. "I'll run interference as long as I can, but don't count on it being too long. Not from the look in those beady eyes." Tanner hesitated only long enough to drop off his and Catherine's plates at an empty table, then quickly ushered her to the already crowded dance floor. A glance backward revealed Vincent politely nodding while listening to Brandon talk about his watch. For an instant, Tanner's eyes met Vincent's, and he knew the competition for Katie wasn't over. He figured he'd be seeing more of Vincent real soon, but what he hadn't counted on was not seeing Brandon again, ever. An approaching vehicle caught Tanner's attention. Thinking it might be his bus, he strained for a glimpse through the fog. To his surprise, it wasn't the bus at all. It was the very same taxi he'd been riding in when it broke down only minutes earlier. Jumping up, he waved at the driver, who ignored him and passed on by. "Wouldn't you know it," Tanner grumbled disgustedly as he noticed another rider in the back seat. "That guy has the heart of a crocodile." Tanner returned to the bench and sat down to wait, completely unaware of two invisible angels who watched him with deep interest. Chapter 2. Mitzi Palmer was a highly dedicated guardian angel, and had been ever since being assigned to the position half a decade ago. Her commitment to the job had never been questioned, nor had her ability to perform the duties of a guardian angel. Not until now, at least. This strange new event did leave her feeling a bit edgy over the possibility that the authorities might be losing their confidence in her. Why else would they send reinforcements to assist in her calling? True, this Brandon Chaney seemed nice enough, and he certainly wasn't the pushy type. Maybe she was reading more into the situation than she should. "Would you mind explaining it one more time?" she asked, doing her best to maintain her patience. "Why exactly have you been assigned as my backup?" Brandon shifted his weight nervously from one leg to the other, indicating he was just as uncomfortable with this new arrangement as Mitzi was. "I'm not really your backup," he attempted to explain. "You're Tanner's permanently assigned guardian angel. I'm only a special assignment angel. I'll be with you just long enough to pull a few loose ends together, then he'll be all yours again." The term special assignment angel was one Mitzi hadn't heard until Brandon showed up an hour earlier, referring to himself as one. She could kick herself for being so dense. After all, she had been in the world of angels more than half a decade now. One would think that by this time she might be a little more familiar with the way things worked over here. Then again, she reasoned, with Tanner Nilsson being her first and only angelic assignment, she hadn't had much opportunity for exploring other celestial avenues. "I hope you realize I'm not familiar with special assignment angels," she admitted. "I still have a lot to learn over here." "You have a lot to learn," Brandon laughed. "Hey, don't think I'm a celestial rocket scientist. In fact, I was sort of hoping you might fill me in on a few things." Mitzi's brow raised quizzically. Brandon wanted information from her? Now there was a twist. No one had ever asked her angelic opinion before. "Fill you in on what exactly?" she cautiously asked. "The only thing I know about is guardian angels, and even then I know about enough to fill half a thimble." Brandon shrugged. "We make a pair, don't we? So tell me what you know about guardian angels." "Well, let's see. As a guardian angel, it's my responsibility to monitor the welfare of my assigned mortal." She glanced at Tanner, still sitting on the bench at the bus stop. "Him," she said, with a nod in Tanner's direction. Brandon's eyes shifted to Tanner, then back to Mitzi. "How did they go about picking you to be Tanner's guardian?" he asked. Mitzi retreated to her own thoughts for a moment before attempting to answer this question. It was something she hadn't considered all that much. "I assume I was picked because my personality meshes with Tanner Nelson's," she said at last. "My supervising angel is constantly going on about how well suited our personalities are for each other." Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. "You think angels are picked for certain positions because someone assumes their personality suits the task? Doesn't that seem like shallow criteria to you?" Mitzi did a double-take. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, a person's qualifications for a job should go a lot deeper than just his or her personality. I'd think an applicant would be scrutinized by one of those celestial computers everyone but me seems to have on a desk in their very own office." "Computers?" Mitzi asked, shocked. "That's the craziest thing I ever heard. Computers shouldn't be used to evaluate people. People should evaluate people. Computers are fine for keeping records and that sort of thing. But evaluating whether or not I'm suited for an assignment? I think not." Brandon obviously wasn't buying it. "Don't underestimate computers, Mitzi. They can do some pretty fantastic stuff, especially the computers they use over here." "Well, personally, I'm glad it was a living being who appointed me to my assignment. And I'm glad I was matched up with Tanner. He's lots of fun." Brandon couldn't help but smile. "You think Tanner's fun, do you? What is it you like, the intrigue of him being a cop?" "He's not a cop," Mitzi corrected. "He's an investigator, and a really good one." "Cop, investigator, what's the difference? It all adds up to intrigue, and I suspect that's what you like about working with him." "Maybe so," she admitted. "Is it a crime to enjoy a good measure of intrigue?" Brandon's smile widened. "No, it's not a crime, and knowing Tanner the way I do, I can see how being his guardian angel could be fun. Maybe exciting is a better word. Never boring, that's for sure. Which brings me to my next question. I've observed some guardian angels who look after more than one mortal. Why is it you're assigned to Tanner and no one else?" Because I'm still just a bud on the angelic vine, she laughingly explained. All guardian angels start with a single client. I'll be given added assignments when I'm ready for them. That makes sense, I guess. My clientele will probably grow when Tanner takes a wife and starts a family. It's quite common for one guardian angel to look after an entire family. Don't hold your breath waiting for this one to get married, Brandon joked. Tanner has an aversion to commitment, and has ever since I've known him. I know that, but I'm sure when the right one comes along, he'll loosen up. How long have you been working with Tanner now? About 5 years. Why? Only 5 years. How much do you know about his life before that time? Not much, I suppose. Well, as far as Tanner's concerned, the right one slipped through his fingers about 3 years before you came into the picture. Her name was Catherine Dalton. Lovely name, but you're right, I don't know about her. I suppose I should take the time to research Tanner's early life. I just never have. So how much time do you have to spend with Tanner? Are you on his shoulder 24/7? Mitzi laughed. No way, I'm not married to my assignment. I have a celestial life of my own to lead. I drop in on him once or twice a day, just to see how things are going. She paused to look at Brandon. You do understand how the celestial monitoring department works, don't you? Oh, yeah, sort of. I've heard of it at least. I've never visited their facility or anything. Have you? Once. I got the grand tour during the orientation for my guardian angel position. It's an elaborate facility, let me tell you. It's almost scary knowing how every mortal alive is under their constant observation. That's what I'm told, Brandon said. I admit it is a little scary. It's probably better we didn't know about it when we were under their microscope, wouldn't you say? Definitely better. But they sure make my job easier. If Tanner gets in the slightest trouble, I'm instantly notified. Mitzi paused a moment, then asked a question of her own. How long has it been since you departed the mortal world for our realm of angels? I've been here about 8 years now. And have you been a special assignment angel all that time? Oh no, I'm regularly attached to the Celestial Records Department. This special assignment thing is a first. Some things about it are going to take some getting used to. Like what? She asked. Like the way I was allowed to cause the engine to stall in that cab. I was never permitted to do such a thing in my job at the records department. Mitzi had been a little surprised at that, too. As a guardian angel, she wasn't allowed to interfere in any way with Tanner's life, other than to make suggestions to his subconscious mind as she deemed appropriate. Brandon had explained that he was permitted to disable the taxi because the authorities wanted Tanner to miss his scheduled flight. For reasons Brandon apparently understood but hadn't shared with Mitzi yet, the authorities wanted Tanner's arrival back at Phoenix to be postponed a few hours. After Brandon disabled the taxi, he went on to assure Mitzi he wasn't permitted to do things like that on an ongoing basis, but only as he was given specific permission. What exactly did you do to the taxi? She asked. I noticed it started again after Tanner was out of the picture. I caused a temporary clog in the fuel line, Brandon explained. No use in preventing the cabbie from doing a full day's work just because Tanner needed to be delayed. By now, Mitzi was feeling better about Brandon's one-time assignment, more confident it wasn't so much a reflection on her ability as it was something the authorities felt Brandon was more qualified for since he and Tanner had been such good friends. She was still certain Brandon would need her help in accomplishing the assignment, whatever it was. No one knew Tanner better than Mitzi, and no one could reach his subconscious mind the way she could. The ease she had always had in reaching Tanner with her suggestions was one thing that made working with him so enjoyable. Some other guardian angels Mitzi knew weren't so lucky with their mortal clients. Oftentimes a mortal just wouldn't listen to the promptings of an angel. They were the ones who invariably ended up in trouble. Mitzi couldn't deny how secretly good it made her feel when Brandon ran into problems getting Tanner to reminisce about the graduation party. No matter how hard Brandon tried, he just couldn't get through. That's when she stepped in. One simple suggestion from her lips, and Tanner was reliving the event in detail. She was, however, a little perturbed that Brandon didn't credit her for the help. He just shrugged it off without a word. Mitzi weighed her next question carefully, finally concluding she had the right to know. Why did the authorities want Tanner to miss his flight? She asked. You mentioned wanting him back in Phoenix later than planned, but why? It's all part of my special assignment, Mitzi. There's an appointment the authorities want Tanner to keep at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, and that appointment requires him to be at the airport at an exact time. Mitzi couldn't help but feel as though Brandon was putting her off by using the term appointment without explaining what the appointment was about. But she let it go for the time being and approached the subject from a fresh angle. The graduation party you wanted Tanner to remember, does that have something to do with your assignment? Brandon grew solemn. It has everything to do with it, he responded. If you like, I can run a hologram replay of the party so you can see for yourself what happened there. You can do that? Mitzi asked excitedly. Well, yeah, I work with holograms all the time in the records department. When it comes to researching history, there's really no other way. Running a hologram of the party would be a snap. How exciting, Mitzi exclaimed. I've only seen 2 celestial holograms, and what an experience they were. I'd love to have you show me one of the party, if you're sure it's all right. Well, I don't know why it wouldn't be, Brandon shrugged. I have the skill, and no one told me I couldn't use it in this assignment. He snapped his fingers, and Mitzi caught her breath in excitement as a real hologram opened up right before her eyes. She was amazed at how these things worked. It was like she really became a part of the scene being depicted, even feeling what the participants were feeling at the time the event actually occurred. She could see how invaluable these would be as tools for researching historical events. She quickly recognized 2 faces in the crowd, one a slightly younger version of Tanner, and the other— "Oh my," she gasped, "you were at that party, Brandon." "I was there. Let me give you a little history to set the stage. 5 of my friends and I had just come from the graduation exercises at U.of.A. in Flagstaff. Tanner you already know. The others are Corey Harper, Vincent Wagner, and Troy Adams." Brandon pointed to each as he said their names. "That's only 4, Mitzi observed. You mentioned a 5th. "The 5th is the beautiful woman standing next to Tanner," Brandon replied. "Remember me mentioning Catherine Dalton?" Mitzi's attention instantly zeroed in on Catherine. She just had to know what the woman who could so completely captivate Tanner's attention looked like. "She is beautiful, isn't she?" Mitzi said. "She's a lot more than beautiful," Brandon said. "Catherine has that special something that reaches out and grabs a man's heart. In the years I knew her, she had more guys chasing her than I could even count." Mitzi looked closer at Catherine, trying to understand just what this special something was. Regardless, she could tell by looking at Tanner that this woman had reached out and grabbed his heart. "He is in love with her, isn't he?" Mitzi remarked. "Tanner, I mean." Brandon laughed. "Tanner wasn't the only one of us in love with Catherine. Corey, Vincent, Troy, and even yours truly fell for her at one time or another. Looking back on it now, I can see that the only 2 who were seriously in love with her were Tanner and Vincent. For the rest of us, it was more or less an infatuation. We didn't know it then, though." Mitzi was still trying to analyze this when a voice over the loudspeaker system at the party caught her attention. She looked to see the person Brandon had identified as Vincent Wagner standing by a microphone. "Hey, people, listen up. I want everyone to know that my good buddy Tanner has just chauffeured the love of my life to the party. Let it be known that Katie and I have set the date. We marry tomorrow, and everyone here is invited to the reception." "Catherine and Vincent were going to be married?" Mitzi asked in surprise. "Not really," Brandon laughed. "It was a game between the 5 of us. We all left our standing proposal at Catherine's feet. Vincent would have given half his father's fortune for that announcement to be true, but it wasn't." "Vincent's father was rather wealthy?" Mitzi questioned. "Rich as they come." "In your dreams," Tanner suddenly yelled back at Vincent. "Katie and I just eloped. That's why we're late." By this time, Mitzi got the picture. She watched as Tanner led Catherine over to the food table where they joined Brandon. "What's that you're showing the others?" she asked. "It's a pocket watch my granddad had given me for a graduation present. It looks like a lovely one." "Yeah, it was. I didn't get much time to enjoy it, though. I want you to notice what a nice guy I was here. If you look, you'll see Vincent walking over to join the group. I knew his intention was to take Catherine away from Tanner, so I played the martyr and urged Tanner to get her out onto the dance floor before Vincent got there." "Oh, I see. If you couldn't have Catherine's affections for yourself, at least you could choose which of the other guys got her affection. From the look on Vincent's face, I'd say he wasn't too pleased with you right about then." "That would be an accurate appraisal. This is where Vincent spills punch on my good shirt, and I think if you watch closely, you'll see it was no accident." Mitzi could hardly help laughing at what she saw. Brandon was right. Vincent walked up and deliberately tripped, spilling punch all over Brandon. Then he whispered something in Brandon's ear. "What's he saying?" Mitzi asked. "Something about me wishing I were dead if I ever came between him and Catherine again." You know, just a friendly little comment about me getting the best of him this time around. What you're seeing now are some of my last moments in mortality. In less than 10 hours, I'll be crossing the line." "What happened, Brandon?" "It all started with the punch on my shirt. I wasn't ready to leave the party, and I couldn't stay there without cleaning up. There's only one downstairs bathroom in the cabin, and it was occupied. But Vincent had given everyone specific orders not to go upstairs for any reason. These were orders he was passing on from his father, who owned the place and had an office on the top floor. But the way I saw it, it was Vincent's fault I needed a place to clean up." "You went upstairs looking for another bathroom?" Mitzi guessed. "After I made darn sure no one was looking." Mitzi watched as the hologram of Brandon climbed the stairs and stepped out of sight down a long hall. One at a time, he checked the doors. "I should have given up when I found them all locked," Brandon explained. "But no, I had to keep trying. Watch what happens at this next door." As Mitzi looked on, she saw Brandon try the door only to find it locked, the same as the others. But when he tugged a little, he discovered the latch hadn't completely snapped. It slipped and the door pulled open. Of all the rooms to find my way inside of, it had to be that one. Brandon sounded disbelieving. It turned out to be Zachary Wagner's personal office. All it took was one look at his computer and I was hooked. Computers have advanced a long way in the mortal world since that day, but at that time his was state-of-the-art. I couldn't resist getting a look at it. There was no bathroom in the office, but there was a wet bar I used to mop up my shirt. Then I headed straight to the computer. Mitzi watched the Brandon in the hologram sit down at the computer and switch it on. At that point, the angel Brandon suddenly brought an end to the hologram. "Why did you do that?" Mitzi pressed. "I wanted to see the rest of it." "Oh, there's nothing more to see, really, just me fooling around with the computer. I'll cut to the chase and tell you what happened next." Mitzi would rather have watched it in a hologram, but she listened to his story instead. "I found that the files were password protected, but it was just too much of a challenge for me to pass up. I broke the password in less than 5 minutes. I should have been satisfied with that, but my shirt was still wet, so I figured I could kill some time while it dried. No one knew what I was up to, or so I supposed at the time, so what could it hurt?" "Are you saying someone did know?" "Zachary had the room wired right down to a video camera that positively identified me. I should have caught it, but I was so darn interested in that computer I tuned everything else out. As I searched through the files, I soon realized what I had stumbled onto. It seems our boy hadn't acquired his wealth selling Girl Scout cookies. I had unwittingly uncovered proof that Wagner Aerospace was selling reclaimed components to NASA under the guise that the parts were brand new. This was definitely something you couldn't ignore, right? No way could I ignore it. At that time, NASA had already lost one shuttle because of maintenance problems. I couldn't just sit by and let those faulty components find their way on board another craft. I had to do something, and I had to have the proof in hand. I searched through drawers until I found a blank computer disk. Then I burned a copy of the incriminating file. I wasn't sure where to go from there, but I knew someone who would be." "Tanner?" Mitzi guessed. "Yeah, even back then, Tanner was heavy into law enforcement stuff. I knew he'd know exactly what to do. I shut down the computer and slipped out of the office, then made my way downstairs to join the others. To my disappointment, I learned that Tanner and Catherine had already left. Catherine hadn't told any of us why she wanted to get home to Mesa as soon as possible, only that she did. She made a deal with Tanner to drive her there, and they took off while I was playing games with Zachary's computer. I slipped back into Wagner's office, where I used his phone to call Tanner's apartment. Since Tanner was driving Catherine down the mountain to Mesa, I knew it would be the wee hours of the morning before he got home. All I could do was leave a message for him to call as soon as he got in. How was I to know I wouldn't be there to take the call? As Mitzi was contemplating all this, she glanced up to see a bus rounding the corner in London. "Would you look at this?" she said. "I do believe Tanner's transportation has arrived." "You're right," Brandon agreed, "and just late enough to ensure Tanner misses his flight." "So far, so good. The plan is right on course." Brandon wet his lips. "If you'd like a bit of vacation from Tanner, I think I can take it alone from here. Until my assignment is closed out, I mean. After that, he's all yours again." Mitzi straightened to her full frame. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" she pressed. "Oh, no, nothing like that. I honestly thought you might like a break." "Well, I wouldn't, thank you. I can be a lot of help with your assignment, if you'll let me." "I'm sure. I was impressed with the way you got Tanner thinking about the graduation party after he turned me off cold. I'd love having your help." "Well, what do you know? He did notice." Okay, she grinned. Where do we go from here? Good question, Mitzi. From here, we pay a visit to the reason Tanner had to miss his regular flight. You saw her in the hologram. Now you get to meet her up close. Catherine Dalton? Mitzi guessed. Yep, Catherine Dalton. Come on, let's go. Chapter 3. Catherine glanced out the little round window to see they were flying over billows of cotton candy clouds so thick it almost seemed she could step out and walk on them. A melancholy ache tugged at her heart as faces of friends and loved ones she was leaving behind flashed before her eyes. When would she ever see them again? The bitter reality was she didn't know. A lot of miles stretched between Melbourne, Australia, and Phoenix, Arizona. These past 8 years in Melbourne had been amazing. But to Catherine, home would always be the Arizona desert, and in her heart she knew it was time to go home. Luck had been with her as she managed a window seat in an empty row. Thankfully, she wouldn't be pressed into polite conversation with some stranger. That was good. This was one of those times when all she wanted was to be left alone. She lowered her seat and closed her eyes with the intention of catching a nap. So this is Catherine Dalton, Mitzi remarked, staring down at Catherine's relaxed face. I think she's even more beautiful now than in the hologram 8 years ago. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on, Brandon said. So how does she fit into your assignment? How do I put this? Brandon began. You know that aversion to commitment I mentioned Tanner having? Let's just say I have to find a way to get him past it. The authorities feel second chances are in order since these two blew their first one. Mitzi's eyes shifted to Brandon, then back to Catherine. The authorities sent you to play Cupid? Brandon appeared uncomfortable at the way Mitzi had put it. It's only part of my assignment, he said. I have other things to do, too. But you're supposed to get Brandon and Catherine together. Is that what you're saying? Well, you know, since I can't have her myself, I suppose it's only right she be given a shot at second best. Yeah, I'm supposed to get 'em together. Mitzi was liking the sound of this assignment better by the minute. In her mind, Tanner was missing out on so much because he didn't have a special someone in his life. Here was her chance to rectify the problem. She wasn't sure what else this special assignment of Brandon's might entail, but this part was right up her alley. Okay, she said, if we want to get the two of them together, don't you think this might be a good time to plant a suggestion in her mind to get her thinking about him? That's exactly what I plan to do, Mitzi. Those were my precise instructions. Mitzi smiled. Well, Mr. Cheney, in that case, I'd say you're in need of my expertise. You may be good with holograms, but I'm the expert at planting suggestions. Why don't you just stand out of the way and let me handle this part of our special assignment? Our assignment? Brandon asked with a laugh. Yes, our assignment. Her response came with a distinct air of confidence. Admit it, Brandon, you need me. I can have the lady thinking about the gentleman long before you could even draw her out of the sleep she's about to drift into. Brandon rubbed his chin as he retreated into thought. Why not? He said with a smile. Be my guest, Mitzi. Do your thing. Try as she might, Catherine couldn't clear her mind enough to allow sleep to settle in. It was like a little voice from somewhere deep in her subconscious kept whispering the name Tanner Nelson. The fact that his name surfaced wasn't surprising, since she was on her way home to Arizona, where she and Tanner had built so many memories as college students. Who knew what might have happened between them if she had only handled things differently back then? Why she wanted to wait until the last second to tell him she was leaving for Melbourne, Australia, was a question she still couldn't answer with any real rationale. She had known about the pending move weeks in advance, but she just couldn't bring herself to spring it on him. It was the coward's way out. She knew that now, and it was a mistake she also knew she could end up paying for the rest of her life. But how was she to know Tanner would react the way he did? She was almost certain he had intended to propose that night, but she might be wrong. Somehow it was hard to picture Tanner as being the marrying kind, at least back then. Had he just taken the news of her move as an excuse to let her walk out of his life? She just didn't know. But still, she should have treated him more honestly. He did deserve that much. Thinking about him now, she couldn't help wondering if he still lived in Phoenix. Then a staggering thought crossed her mind. What if they should run into each other? What would she say to him? What could she say? Then her thoughts shifted to her decision to leave Arizona and Tanner 8 years ago. It wasn't like she had to go to Australia. She could have stayed behind and let her parents go without her. After all, they were capable adults who could have gotten along perfectly well on their own. But that was a possibility Catherine would never have considered, with her father changing careers so late in life, and with that career change taking him halfway around the world. She refused to believe either he or her mother wouldn't need her, at least until they had time to put down some roots. She never anticipated staying away from home as long as she had. Things had just worked out that way. Wherever Tanner was now, and whatever his circumstances, Catherine was positive he'd be carrying a badge and a gun. Law enforcement was his passion back then, and she knew him well enough to know it would be now. Again, she tried unsuccessfully to put thoughts of him aside. Her memories shifted to the drive home from Flagstaff following the graduation party. Tanner had been in such a great mood that night. Catherine remembered how she wanted to savor every minute with him before the time came for her inevitable confession. Tanner had suggested a late-night snack at a Denny's restaurant on the way home. It sounded like fun, and it actually turned into an early breakfast after checking the menu. Catherine could almost smell the hot cakes and eggs. But the part she remembered most was their conversation. Was that really 8 years ago? Incredible. Absolutely incredible. "So how does it feel, pretty lady?" Tanner asked as he buttered a slice of toast. "Being a certified teacher, I mean. It's always been your dream, and voila, here you are." Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her time with Tanner was growing short, and the prospect of the confession she'd soon have to make wasn't getting any more appealing. "It feels nice," she responded. "That's it?" he chuckled. "Nice? I sort of expected you'd be a bit more enthused." "I'm sorry, Tanner. I know this is a big day for you in the dream department, with the law enforcement career practically in your pocket and all. It's just that, well—" Tanner bit off the corner of his toast and stared as her voice trailed off. "It's just that what?" he prompted. "Nothing," she said. "I'm in a silly mood, that's all." Tanner dropped the toast and stared even harder. "I'm not buying it, Katie," he said. "Something's wrong, and I want to know what it is." "I can't do this," Catherine told herself. "I have to tell him, but how?" Tanner's eyes were burning through her, and he refused to look away. She held off until she could stand it no longer. "All right," she blurted out. "There is something bothering me." Tanner moved his plate to one side and leaned a little closer. "And that is?" he calmly asked. Catherine brushed her hair off one shoulder. I applied for a job as a history teacher. I've been accepted. I start 2 weeks from Monday." "That's a bad thing?" Tanner asked, not lowering his eyes 1 inch. "No, that is, yes," she drew a breath. "My job is at the University of Melbourne." Tanner's eyes widened, and he slowly straightened. "Melbourne, Australia?" he guessed. "Yes," she gulped, unable to contain one hot tear that trickled slowly down her cheek. He was still looking at her, but his eyes reflected a mood change she so desperately wanted to reverse. "Going to Melbourne, Australia, eh?" She only nodded. Tanner feigned a shallow smile. "That sounds pretty awesome. Maybe you'll get to meet that Dundee fellow, or should I call him a bloke?" Removing a tissue from her purse, Catherine tried to smile as she dabbed both eyes. "My dad bought a ranch there. He's always wanted to live in Australia, and he's always wanted to try his hand at ranching." "Ranching, you say? Oh, sounds like something your dad might do." "He waited until I was near graduation before springing this on me. Mom pressured him into telling me a few weeks back." "Weeks? You've known that long?" "I probably should have told you. I didn't tell anyone. You're the first to know, if that's any consolation." "Hey, you wanted to keep it to yourself. I'm sure you had your reasons." She had her reasons, all right. They all involved her being a coward. Catherine knew she had fallen in love with Tanner, and she thought he had fallen in love with her. She was afraid of losing what they had, and didn't want to chance it 1 second sooner than necessary. "The only reason I didn't tell you is because I hate goodbyes," she lied. "I wanted to hold off as long as possible." Tanner wiped his mouth and dropped the napkin to his lap. "You say you start teaching in 2 weeks? That means you'll be leaving soon. Will there be time for a party at least?" Her eyes lowered. "No, I fly out tomorrow afternoon." "Tomorrow?" The sound of his voice exploded in her ears. "You're leaving tomorrow, and you're just now telling me?" Catherine knew Tanner might be hurt when he learned of her plans, but she had no idea it would hit him as hard as it did. It couldn't be all that bad, could it? They could write, they could talk to each other over the phone, she wouldn't be gone forever, and they could pick up where they left off when she returned. As she fought to keep the sobs from showing, she noticed Tanner pull something from his pocket. It was a small black box, which he fumbled with for several seconds. Catherine couldn't be positive, but she was almost certain it was a ring box. Was he about to propose? Her heart sank as Tanner returned the unopened box to his pocket. "What was that?" Catherine asked. The question slipped out before she could think. "Nothing, really," Tanner answered, the sparkle that had been in his voice all night now missing. "I was going to play a joke, that's all. Somehow it doesn't seem very appropriate now. Anyway, it wouldn't have been all that funny without the guys here to see it." "That was no joke. You were about to propose." Again, the words just seemed to tumble out. No, it was just a joke." Catherine was remembering her hurt upon hearing those words when the flight attendant's voice brought her around. "Would you like a pillow?" the woman asked, smiling warmly. "Yes, thank you," Catherine replied. "That would be nice." As the flight attendant walked away, Catherine punched the pillow and placed it behind her head. She closed her eyes, hoping thoughts of Tanner would leave now. No such luck. This time her mind's eye shifted to the scene just after the breakfast at Denny's. It was their final goodbye on the front porch of her parents' old home in Mesa. Catherine knew she would never forget the look in Tanner's eyes. Was it hurt or betrayal? She was never quite sure, but his face revealed a deep enough emotion that she realized it was the end to what might have been a wonderful dream. He didn't even kiss her. He simply touched her cheek, then turned and walked away. Catherine had written to Tanner from Australia, just as she had promised. 3 times, in fact, but no answer came. Did she have regrets? How could she not? But if she had it to do all over again, what would she do differently? That was another lifetime ago. She and Tanner were so young enough that all she could see was the light of the present day, and not the greater light of so many tomorrows on the horizon. A great many of those tomorrows had come and gone since the emptiness of that night. Sadly, the emptiness was never filled. Catherine drew a deep breath, closed her eyes, and at last fell into a restless sleep. Chapter 4. Flying had always been a passion for Tanner, but flying as a passenger on an airliner was his least favorite way of doing it. He much preferred being in the pilot's seat, but it was a bit difficult justifying use of the company jet for an assignment on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean. Thanks to his personal digital assistant, he was able to use this time to pound out a stack of reports that otherwise he'd have to face back in the home office. Reports were the one part of Tanner's job he had never liked. Why couldn't life be more like the movies, where James Bond spent all his time solving crimes and 0 time doing reports? The flight had been pleasant enough, in spite of the fact that it was 4 hours behind his intended schedule. It was a welcome sound when the captain's voice finally came over the intercom announcing their arrival at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. We'll be dropping down for our final approach in the next few minutes. We'd like to ask you to take your seat and remain buckled in for the rest of the flight. We anticipate a smooth landing and should be docking at our assigned gate in approximately 15 minutes. It's a clear day in Phoenix, with an airport temperature reported to be 96 degrees. A little warmer than what you left in London, but not as warm as might be expected from a June day in Phoenix." Tanner raised his seat and snapped his safety belt in place. The pilot's prediction of a smooth landing turned out to be accurate, and with Tanner traveling first class, he was near enough to the exit to be one of the first off the plane. His only carry-on was his laptop, and he never bothered with check-in luggage. With the number of air miles he logged, it was easier to have his luggage sent directly to his apartment. If he wasn't home when it arrived, the apartment manager would hold it for him, a much easier arrangement than standing in line waiting for it, something Tanner didn't do well. Leaving the gate, Tanner made his way through the crowd toward the elevator, where he intended to ride it up to the parking level. As usual, he had told no one when to expect him home. That way he could make an uninterrupted beeline for his apartment, soak an hour or so in the jacuzzi, then sleep a few hours to help shake the jet lag. This was a small luxury Tanner allowed himself. He'd simply check in at the office in the morning, and as usual, no one would be the wiser. Being angels, Mitzi and Brandon had little trouble keeping track of Tanner even when he was engulfed by the crowd. Mitzi tingled with excitement at the anticipation of where this special assignment was headed. Not that being Tanner Nelson's guardian angel wasn't exciting enough on a day-to-day basis, But this assignment held the promise of something greatly lacking in Tanner's life, a promise of romance. Mitzi was certain the assignment would run much deeper than just getting Tanner and Catherine back together, but that's the part that interested her, for the moment at least. "There's Catherine directly ahead," Brandon suddenly exclaimed. "She's disembarking at Gate 10, Mitzi." Mitzi glanced up. "Do you think we'll have to intervene to get the two of them together?" "I don't think so," Brandon explained. "When it comes to something like precision timing, I figure the authorities will take charge personally. It looks to me like the two of them are already on a collision course." "I think you're right," Mitzi cheerfully agreed. "Isn't this exciting?" "Yeah," Brandon grumbled. "What could be more exciting than watching my best friend and the only woman I ever thought I was in love with get together?" Mitzi found this amusing, but kept it to herself. Tanner thought nothing of it when the woman stepped directly into his path, not until he chanced to glance at her face. There was a split second before recognition set in, and another split second of denial before the full impact of who it was struck home. "Katie?" he gasped, while staring into a set of eyes just as startled as his own. "Tanner?" came her stammering reply. For the next few moments the two of them remained silent. "Why are you in Phoenix?" Tanner numbly heard himself ask. Catherine's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Tanner discovered himself captivated by her beauty, a beauty that had only intensified in the years since last seeing her. Her hair was shorter now, and there was a look of maturity about her. "Why are you here?" he asked again, shock gripping him. I've come home," she somehow managed to respond. Tanner rubbed his face briskly, almost expecting her to disappear. He blinked 3 times, and she was still there, alive and vibrant as ever. Tanner felt someone bump into him. "Pardon me, sir," came a sharp voice. "Do you mind?" Tanner instantly realized that a man behind her was wanting to use the payphone. Taking Catherine's bags from her, he quickly led the way to a more secluded spot. "What do you mean you've come home?" he asked. "For a visit, or what?" "No, not for a visit. I'm here to stay. I've accepted a teaching position at ASU West." The inflection in Catherine's voice was a dead giveaway that she was just as nervous about this chance meeting as was Tanner. "The job doesn't start until September, but I wanted some time to get things in order," she went on to explain. Tanner's heart was pounding. Could this be real, or was he dreaming? It wouldn't be his first dream of Catherine Dalton to reach a disappointing end at the sound of an alarm clock. He nodded, still amazed that she was standing in front of him. "You've really come home to stay?" he asked. "Yes." "Your job at Melbourne didn't work out?" "It worked out fine. I fell in love with the Australian people." "Your parents? Did things work out well for them?" "They couldn't be happier. Dad's like a kid with a new toy. He took to ranching like a bee to a honeysuckle. He and Mom have tons of friends there now, mostly from church. They've reached a point where I felt like I could come home without disrupting their world." She paused a moment, smiled, and then added, "So here I am." "Yes," Tanner responded with a smile of his own. "So you are." A long, awkward moment passed before either of them spoke. It was Catherine who jumped in first. "I suppose I'd better pick up the rest of my luggage. I brought along 2 more suitcases. I'm having everything else shipped over." Tanner felt a churning in his stomach. He had to do something. He couldn't just let her walk away. "Will you be staying at your folks' old house?" he asked, then realized what a dumb question it was, since he knew her folks had sold their house years ago. "Oh, no," she said with a shaky laugh. "That place is gone. I'll just get a room for the first few days until I can find a suitable apartment." He cautiously asked his next question. "So is your husband along?" He instantly wished he could take it back or find a way to hide under the edge of the carpet. I'm not married," she responded. "Oh, good. Oh man." Tanner's face burned with embarrassment. "I meant to say it's good that you've come home, not that you're not married." "Oh." She nervously wet her lips. "How about you, Tanner? Are you married yet?" No, not me." This time her smile seemed more real. "I didn't think you would be. It sort of looks like neither of us are the marrying kind." "Yeah, looks like." She drew in a deep breath and let it out very slowly. "I suppose I really should get down to baggage claim. Wouldn't want to lose my suitcases at a time like this." "No, I guess not. That could be bad." Tanner handed back the items he had helped her with. "It was really nice seeing you again," she said. "Yeah, for me too." Catherine's heart was pounding as she contemplated stepping onto the escalator and letting it sweep her away from this chance meeting. What a strange coincidence it was. She had wondered what might happen if she ever ran into Tanner again, and she'd barely made it off the plane before it had happened. She'd tried not to stare, but she couldn't help it. Tanner had aged some, but it only enhanced his already rugged handsomeness. He still sported a full head of jet black hair, and his dark eyes still held that fascinating hint of mystery. His face contained a stubble of beard, which she assumed was there only because he hadn't had the chance to shave yet. Not that it mattered to her. Why should it matter? This was just a chance meeting, nothing more. He'd be going his way, and she'd be going hers. She couldn't help but notice the little dimple in the center of his chin, the dimple she had always loved. And he still radiated his trademark air of confidence. It was so easy to see why she had once fallen in love with the guy. "Well," she said, "have yourself a wonderful day. Maybe we'll run into each other again sometime." Maybe. She couldn't stop the tears from welling up as she walked toward the escalator, but she kept her head turned so he couldn't see. Why did it suddenly feel like the walls were closing in on her? Tanner was just a guy she once knew, nothing more. So why did she want him to stop her now? All of a sudden, she wondered why she had thought coming home was such a good idea, and she wanted to be someplace where she could cry without shame. "Wait, Katie!" Tanner called out. She froze in her tracks, and ever so gradually turned to face him. She hoped he wouldn't notice she had been crying. "I was wondering," he began, "could we, maybe get together sometime for a bite to eat?" Had he asked what she thought he had? "I'd like that," she said, unable to keep her voice from cracking. "Do you have a cell phone?" "Yes." She dropped her suitcase and began fumbling through her purse for something to write on. "Don't worry about that," Tanner said, hurrying over to where she stood. "Here, put your number in this." He handed her his PDA. She punched in her number and gave it back. He looked at it and grinned. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? I'll be looking forward to it." And how, she added to herself. Then, picking everything up, she stepped onto the escalator, watching him out of the corner of her eye until he was out of sight. It was all she could do to keep from shouting. "That went well," Brandon said through a huge grin. "Looks like we have our foot in the door, Mitzi." Chapter 5. Catherine sat staring at the man across the table from her. Was it possible he was really Tanner Nilsson? What were the odds of the two of them meeting at the airport the way they had? And to think he'd actually asked her to meet him for lunch. Suddenly the world was a wonderful place, and coming home was all it should be. Her first night back in Phoenix was certainly not what she had expected it to be. Her plans were to find a room where she could crash to overcome the jet lag and probably sleep in half the next day. But after running into Tanner at the airport and having him say he'd call, sleep suddenly became something very elusive. What little she got came filled with dreams of Tanner, and as far as the sleeping late thing went, she was up at 6. By 7 she was dressed and beside the phone, waiting and hoping. Would he call or wouldn't he? Tanner had always been the impatient one, but right now it seemed to have rubbed off on her. By the time he did call, around 10, she was a nervous wreck. It was impressive the way he remembered her favorite restaurant, the one with the funny name and the greatest Mexican food she'd ever tasted. There was so much Katie had missed about the States those 8 years she spent in Melbourne, and one of them was the chili relleno served at Carlos O'Brien's. She wasn't sure what pleased her most at the moment, the wonderful aroma of the restaurant or the company of the ruggedly handsome man just across the table. "You've cut your hair," Tanner remarked. "I really like it." "Thanks. My dad hates it. He says a woman is supposed to have long hair. This coming from a man who wore his in a crew cut his whole life." Tanner changed the subject to one she had been thinking of herself. "What do you think the odds were of coming in on adjoining flights and meeting the way we did at the airport last night?" he asked. "Pretty darn incredible, I'd say." "Even more so than you might know," he explained. "If it hadn't been for a certain cabbie having engine trouble on the streets of London yesterday morning, I'd have been home 4 hours sooner." "Oh my," she mused to herself, "it's almost like the hand of destiny had a part in this." Since she couldn't see the two angels looking on, she had no way of knowing just how close to the truth her musing was. "What took you to London?" she asked. "Business or pleasure?" "Business," he responded with a smile. "Out chasing a bad guy." "I should have guessed." "So where did you end up? Working for the CIA or something?" He laughed. "The CIA is too political for my blood, although my job is parallel to what they do at times. But enough about me. Let's talk about you, Katie. How long do you plan on staying in that hotel?" "No longer than I have to. I want to start apartment hunting in a day or so, just as soon as the jet lag settles down." "You're going to want something near ASU West, right? The closer the better, since that's where I'll be working." Tanner folded the menu and set it aside. You know where my apartment is? He asked. Without giving her time to answer, he went on. It's on 43rd Avenue, just south of Thunderbird. What? Talk about irony. You're right across the street from ASU West. Are there any openings at your complex? He shook his head. Sorry, Katie. The place stays pretty full, I'm afraid. Figures, she said. Any chance I can talk you into moving out? He laughed, but let the subject drop. Just then, the server stepped up to see if they were ready to place their order. I think we're ready, Tanner told him. I'll have a beef chimichanga, and I'm guessing the lady wants a chili relleno. He looked over at her and grinned. She smiled back. Yes, I think I will have a chili relleno. You have a great memory, Mr. Nelson. Anything to drink? The server asked. I'll have a lemonade, and she wants a Sprite with 2 straws. Did I get that one right, too? He asked. You even remembered the 2 straws, she laughed. Always did like drinking with 2 straws. She was flattered that he remembered something so small. Maybe he did think of her now and then. The server walked away, and Catherine picked up a chip, dipping it in the salsa and biting off the end. So, tell me about Australia, Tanner suggested. Is it true they hire kangaroos for bus drivers? No, she laughed. That's not true. We have lots of kangaroos, though. It's funny, Tanner added. I've pretty much circled the globe in my job, but I've never been to Australia. She couldn't help but wonder about this. Had he not been to Australia because his job never required him going there? Or was it something else? Had he avoided it because he knew she was there? So, what's this job that takes you all over the world? She asked. Tanner bit down on a chip. I'm an investigator for a criminal law firm. This came as a bit of a shock to Catherine. Being a law firm investigator didn't sound all that exciting. Still, she could be missing something from the title. After all, it was a job that apparently took him all over the world. So tell me about it, she said. Does it involve many crime scenes? I get my share of crime scenes, he explained. But I get a fair share of other things, too, like tracking down certain characters no one else seems to be able to locate. Tracking them down and bringing them in. That's the fun part. Tanner moved away from the subject of himself and asked a question about her. You told me you're not married. Is there anyone special in your life? Catherine nearly spilled her Sprite when this question came. Her face flushed as she remembered Ned Weathersby. She and Ned had been seeing each other on a fairly regular basis for more than a year now. Ned had proposed, but Catherine had continually put him off. He was a nice enough guy, and one who'd make some woman a great husband, but she just wasn't sure that woman was her. No, she finally responded. No one special. I'm not saying I haven't dated, but I must be a little too American for those Aussie blokes. Yeah, those blokes, as you call them, must be either blind or crazy. Catherine tried to cover her blush. There was no denying her pleasure at Tanner's attention, but letting it show was another matter. When Tanner didn't stop looking, she grabbed another chip and bit into it, doing her best to appear casual. Now it was her turn to change the subject. I've never heard the full story of what happened to Brandon, she said. The newscasts didn't reach Melbourne, and I haven't been in touch with anyone stateside for years. It's not a very pretty story, I'm afraid. Are you aware that even though Brandon's body was never found, Troy was convicted of his murder? That much I do know, but I don't believe it. Troy and Brandon were inseparable. You got that right. Troy was framed by someone with a lot of power. I've never been able to uncover the proof, but I refuse to give up. The real killer had to have made a mistake, Katie. All criminals make mistakes. Once I find that mistake, I will bring the truth to light, and I will see that justice is served. How did they convict Troy? Catherine questioned. Through shoddy investigative work, that's how. That and unethical lawyers. The blood found in Troy's apartment should have been an obvious plant to anyone with a trained eye. Brandon's blood? Catherine guessed. It was Brandon's blood, all right, on a handkerchief hidden under the pillow on Troy's sofa. And get this, an anonymous tipster told the police exactly where to look for it. Nothing else was found in the apartment to indicate Brandon had even been there, nor did Troy have a way to dispose of a body. He didn't own a car. What did he do, wrap the body in a sleeping bag and hitchhike with it over his shoulder to some secluded spot where he could dispose of it? Catherine could sense Tanner's frustration over Troy, so when the server showed up with their food, she figured it was a good time to let the subject drop. She had forgotten the size of the portions served at Carlos O'Brien's. She was hungry, and it smelled heavenly, but there was no way she could get all that food down. More drinks? The server asked, seeing their glasses low. Yes, please, Catherine answered. And could I get more salsa for my chili relleno? Yes, ma'am, the server smiled. Have it right out. Catherine sliced off one end of the relleno and took a bite. Ooh, this is even better than I remembered. I think I've died and gone to heaven." "Enjoy it," Tanner smiled, taking a bite of his chimichanga, "but save room for the fried ice cream." Catherine nodded. She had forgotten about the fried ice cream, but it was something definitely worth saving room for. "I have a suggestion about your apartment problem, Katie," Tanner remarked offhandedly. She looked up. "What's that?" "It's kind of a far-out idea, but you might want to consider it. I hold the lease on 2 adjoining apartments. One of them I live in. The other I've converted into a forensic lab. It would be no trouble at all for me to consolidate into a single apartment. It would be a little crowded, having my living quarters combined with my lab, but it's something I can live with until we can find you a more suitable place." "Tanner, I can't take your apartment." "Hey, it's no big deal. My second apartment has everything I need. Sleeping quarters, a kitchen, the works." "Tanner." "What?" "I'm offering you free rent right across the street from your pending job. You know what they say about a gift horse?" Catherine knew from the look in Tanner's eyes the offer was genuine. Here she was, worried that he might make this one date to Carlos O'Brien's their last, and that he might not even call again. Instead, he was offering to give up half his living space for her. She didn't know whether to shout for joy or be embarrassed for even considering the idea. "Tanner, The apartment's yours, Katie. All you have to do is say the word." 2 nearby angels stood eagerly watching the lunch date. "Okay, Mitzi," Brandon casually remarked. "I admit you were right in putting the idea about sharing apartments with Catherine in Tanner's mind, and I also admit I never would have thought of it. What I'm trying to say is, you're turning into one great partner." "Thank you, Brandon. It means a lot to hear you say that." "So, how are we going to get the 2 of them moving along into stage 2 of the plan?" Mitzi knew exactly what Brandon meant by stage 2, since they had recently discussed the elements of his assignment in detail. The plan entailed getting Tanner back up to Zachary Wagner's cabin, where there was evidence to be uncovered. Evidence concerning Brandon's murder, as well as some other things. "I have an idea where to start," she told him. "How about if I plant a dream in Catherine's mind tonight? A haunting dream that she can't shake off until she brings it up to Tanner. When she does bring up the dream, we can take it from there." "You can plant dreams?" Brandon asked. "Nothing to it." "It just might work, Mitzi. Let's do it that way." Chapter 6. Catherine woke to the sound of a mockingbird. For a moment, she thought she was back in her room at her folks' old home in Mesa, near the fruitless mulberry tree where the mockingbird family nested every year. As reality surfaced, she shot straight up in bed. She was in Tanner's apartment. No, that didn't sound right. She was in the apartment Tanner had so graciously vacated for her. And what an apartment it was. It had everything, right down to a built-in jacuzzi. She glanced at the closed and locked door separating this apartment from the one Tanner had moved all his things into, and a new fog of guilt settled in as she thought about the sacrifice he was making for her. It hadn't taken long to move his things out and replace them with what few things she had brought from Melbourne. He had told her his second apartment was converted into a forensic lab, but until she saw it for herself, she had no conception of how complete that lab was. There was equipment the likes of which she had never seen, along with 5 separate lab tables. He told her he would still have a bedroom and kitchen, and he did, sort of. They were piled high with supplies, but he assured her he could make do. At least the sink, kitchen range, and refrigerator were where he could get to them. That and his bed.
This concludes CD number 1. To continue listening, insert CD number 2.